No one you know is sick. It feels like a normal day. It may stay like this for a long time until one day a few people you know are sick. And suddenly a few days later, it will seem like everyone is sick, and it will feel like it happened instantly. Everything looks fine until it isn't fine. This is the paradox of pandemics, and it's why with an outbreak like COVID-19, you hear health officials calling for huge, drastic, and rapid responses in the early days when infection numbers are still relatively small. Instead of thinking about viruses, let's say you have a pond, and on the pond is a single lily pad. This type of lily pad reproduces once a day, so on day 2, you have 2 lily pads. On day 3, you have 4, etc. If it takes the lily pads 60 days to cover the pond completely, how long will it take for the pond to be covered halfway? The answer is 59 days. The area covered doubles from half to the whole pond on the last day. I bet some of you knew that though, because you're pretty smart. But on what day do the lily pads cover a mere 1% of the pond? Well, surprisingly, that doesn't happen until day 54. The pond is basically empty until it's very suddenly not empty. We go from covering less than 1% to covering the whole pond in just the final 7 days. This is exponential growth, and it's how pandemics work. We multiply today by some constant to get the value for the next day. The time doesn't have to be days, but that's helpful to use for something like lily pads. Our constant was 2, or COVID-19. Starting in mid-February, we've seen between 1.1 and 1.4 times more cases each day. A number over 1 tells us every day we're seeing more new cases than the day before. You can see the number of total cases starts to add up really fast. Exponential growth can be scary, but obviously this can't go on forever and fill the known universe with viruses for a few reasons. The virus will either infect everybody, like our lilies filling up the pond, or what actually happens is the virus stops finding people to infect, either by running into people who are already sick, or we isolate people who are sick, or thanks to something like a vaccine, spreading resistance in the population. Slow down how many new cases we see every day to flatten the curve and keep a pandemic from overwhelming healthcare. In 1918, in the early days of the worst influenza pandemic in history, the city of Philadelphia ignored warnings and held a parade attended by 200,000 people. 3 days later, every bed in Philadelphia's hospitals was full and 4,500 people died within a week. At the same time, St. Louis, 2 days after detecting the first cases, closed schools, playgrounds, even churches. Work shifts were changed. Public gatherings of more than 20 people were banned. And this was the result: a tale of 2 cities. Now remember that the height of any point on our S-curve tells us how many total cases the outbreak has caused as of that day. But if we take the slope at that point, that shows how many new cases that day, which makes sense. Not many new cases early on, then a whole lot each day, and then not many new cases again as the virus dies out or goes quiet. If you've taken calculus and worked out derivatives before, then you may see where I'm going here. Plotting the different slopes along our S-shaped curve, we get this. This is what health officials are worried could overwhelm our healthcare system. But luckily, we can make it look like this instead, if we change how our S-curve looks. And how we do that is by lowering the constant we multiply from day to day in our exponential growth. The really important thing here is, for a virus that humans have never encountered before, like the one that's causing COVID-19, no one's immune to it. The only way to lower the growth rate isn't medicine or anything like that. It's to slow down those infections and keep them from happening in the first place.